Perfect. Okay. Well, first off, thank you for coming and joining us. I'm really glad that you reached out and let us know that you're interested. That's always exciting and makes our job a little easier. So first, tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do in general, and then we'll kind of jump into breaking down host home, care and your background. So the floor is yours.
Okay. My name is Tim Braimah. My background, I began as a law student before I went into human services. Educational background, I went to schools in the UK, King's College London, Middlesex University, London, and University of Bedfordshire in Luton, all in the UK. Then when I transitioned into the US, I went into human services at Abizu University. And the reason I went into human services, I found it to be more broader than law. In human services, I could work with much more vulnerable groups of people than law, because initially my focus was on refugee law, just to work with refugees. But with human services, I found I could help refugees, I could help individuals with developmental disabilities, foster kids, trafficked women. So human services just gave me a broader platform to work with much more people.
It's always great to hear human services described like that, because it is appealing in the sense that you can work with such a vast array of people and you are confronting a lot of different issues. So you've worked with obviously various populations. And so how did you go from kind of exploring the overarching branches of human services into what you do now? First, maybe talk a little bit about what it is you do, and then kind of tell us how you ended up doing this for yourself.
Presently, I work with individuals with developmental disabilities. I provide them homes. In my role, I have to leave and take care of an individual with intellectual and developmental disability 24/7. When I mean 24/7, I mean 24/7 to the dot, the whole day. So before getting to help people with individuals with developmental disabilities, I work with foster kids, foster youths. I've worked with trafficked women. I've not had the personal experience working with individuals forced into child marriage, but I've written on child marriage in northern Nigeria. And also, before I got into this, I've also worked with refugees, South Sudanese refugees. When I started, my role was to help South Sudanese refugees look for housing. If you know the history of South Sudan, there was a civil war which broke out that led to their forced migration, and most of them resettled in Omaha, Nebraska. And initially, when I first moved to Omaha, Nebraska, that was actually my first introduction to human services, helping these South Sudanese refugees look for housing.
Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, Nebraska.
The history of migration and settlement and stuff is in itself enduring and very surprising. But Omaha, Nebraska? So why was it Omaha?
For me, it was Omaha because my parents were migrants themselves, not refugees. They were just migrants who came from Nigeria to the U.S. to probably, I would say, economic migrants to find a better life for themselves. So when you have that first primary migration, for me as a secondary migrant, it makes more sense to go to where my parents migrated to. So that's how I ended up in Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, it's in some cases and not all where did the first person go? We'll just follow track.
Yeah.
Omaha. I need to visit Omaha just so I can have a better idea of what I picture in my mind Omaha is. So jumping back to the fascinating work that you do, you have someone in your home living with you. You share a space and you provide, care, a range set of skills and care to is some people with intellectual disabilities, or do you also still work with refugees in the same breath?
So what I do is whenever I'm free, I work and I do independent work. So let's say there's a troubled youth. Yeah, people might call me and say, "Hey Tim, we have a troubled youth. Can you speak to this youth?" And for example, when a South Sudanese refugee or any other refugee comes to Omaha, Nebraska, they might refer me to them. It's just independent work, but mostly I work with as a host home provider. The other, like I said, like we began, human services is like an umbrella. I don't want to be restricted to just one aspect. But for now, my main focus is on being a host home provider, but my tentacles are still into helping other vulnerable groups. Yeah.
For me, on a personal level, that is inspiring and it's very encouraging because I've never been able to pick a population, and you don't have to. It's not like you sign up for this in this field and you have to, silo off. But it is very hard to restrict that desire to care and provide in whatever way you can to one direction. And some people enjoy that, and that's totally fine. But I very much appreciate your specialty being the specialty of everything, right? So let's walk our viewers through this, right? What it is like being a host home provider. So when we first spoke, this is the first time I'd ever heard of this position, this specialty. And I think it's fantastic, but I'm assuming that a lot of viewers the same questions are kind of popping into their head. Like, what do you mean you have someone living with you in your home that you care for? And that's your specialty. Let's start with kind of what you're doing on a daily basis and sharing this living space in the situation with another person.
So what I do on a daily living basis, apart from sharing a home, my space, is I get to ensure that the individual, if the person takes medication, medication is administered on time. I take them to their appointments, and I also take them into the communities for them to integrate into the communities and feel whole like human beings. They're doing things other people in the world are doing. So my job is to make sure that individual is immersed into their community. So I take them shopping. Sometimes we go to the YMCA, the gym. We go shopping. So in general, I'm like a guide. I don't know how to describe myself, but I'm a guide. I'm in this person's life to make sure this person is whole and gets the feeling of being alive. Historically, if you read the history of individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, they've been stigmatized, referred to as retarded, referred to as they've not been seen as human beings. So my role is for that individual to be seen as a human being other than live with me in my own home. Yeah.
I just love the authenticity in that. It's absolutely beautiful. It's more than just inspiring. It's just like, yes, I think you, Tim, have you considered working in human services before? That's the kind of attitude that you need when you're working with people. So, okay, we have a basic understanding of what you're doing on the daily basis. How is this different from someone who has in-home care, right? So maybe not necessarily just individuals with disabilities, but those who have hired someone to come into their home or their place of residence, or where it may be, and then leave, come and go either daily or every other day. You're sharing a living space with another individual, and so how is the experience different? Also, how is the effectiveness of the services that you provide better, more effective, I suppose, than the contrary being coming in and out of someone else's situation in a hired position?
I would say providing host home services is different from in-home care and group homes in the sense that as time goes on, I become family. and individuals with developmental disabilities can't get that family presence, that family factor or feeling in a group home or in a in-home care, because what they get to see is different faces daily, because in in-home care and group homes, individuals come in shifts. I do not come in shifts as a host home provider. I come in 24/7. I'm like, for example, I had an individual who had one of his parents, his dad passed on, and when I broke the news to him, he was like, "Oh well, Tim, you're my dad now." That is what you get as a host home provider. I'm sort of dad now, and I'll forever be dad. So that's the difference, and I think mostly agencies they're now seeing the effectiveness of host home, because it's more, it's how does, I don't know how to explain this better, is you don't get that family feeling when you're like I said before, you don't get that family feeling when you are in home care, because they are seeing different faces. They're seeing different faces as opposed to seeing my face alone and they calling me friend and family. They don't get that in home. And what the other one is in a group home.
Yeah, the settings in and of themselves, and then the system, right? The procedures, the guidelines, they're all meant to reflect some level of consistency and order, right? Under the presumption that followed, the era of treating individuals as if they weren't human, as if they were different, as if they were lesser. The shift went into, okay, let's set up a series of steps, homes. Let's make everything consistent in the sense that it's repetitive and predictable, right? And so since we've been functioning in these spaces under that premise for decades now, what you're doing is it pushes against that, which also invites back in that human connection part that can easily get lost. And we see it happen. We see that's a huge challenge. And no matter what kind of service you're providing in human services, people are impersonal. They don't mean to be sometimes. Sometimes they just are. But I guess that's the red tape, right? In the way that we proceed in providing for others in home care and in group homes, those settings, they run off these procedurally set bases and facts and ideas with the intention of, predictability means safety. Yeah. But what is lost, what's the consequence of that predictability? And it's that, it's that human connection part that underlies human services since its, inception, even before its inception, right? So I imagine that, I know I'm not saying just because I didn't know what this role existed, that it's not well known in the field, because the field is so, expansive. And I imagine that a lot of viewers, the first time they've heard of this position. When I was doing research on it, I did find programs that are here in the state of Georgia. And so I can see that it is an established idea, but I also imagine there's a lot of pushback, specifically from the people who either benefit or promote these other systems of procedural order that function within these other environments and spaces that we're discussing. So do you see that as well, that the idea is, kind of threatening to what's already been established?
I would say so, because if you, I don't know why. I can't tell you the exact reason there are pushbacks, if it's monetary reasons. But for instance, one of the individuals that lived with me previously, when he came out from his group home into my host home, into my home, what we saw was a decrease in behavior, decrease in aggressive behavior. So that shows the effectiveness of host homes, living one-on-one with an individual, working with an individual with intellectual disabilities. So, but in the group home, we saw an escalation of behaviors because he was dealing with different people, different individuals, different staffs. So there was a collision of different characters. But coming to a host home, he understands me, I understand him, or I understand any individual placed in my home. We understand each other, what we like, what we dislike, but we set boundaries. So that is what you don't get in a group home. So even if there are pushbacks, eventually, I think people will get to realize that to effectively take care of individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities, you need that one-on-one connection eventually. So irrespective of the pushback, I think we're eventually going to get there to place individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities in homes rather than in group homes. Because for me personally, I see group homes as just institutions like the old days. That's my own opinion.
Absolutely. I want to point out the irony in something that you just mentioned. So in these other settings where there are multiple people involved in the care procedure provided, right? That's just the thing. There's not, because there are so many characters and individuals and hierarchies, okay? There is not time, there is not motivation, there isn't an invitation created for the human connection to be made. Right?
Absolutely.
And I wanna be very specific about what I mean by human connection. So we're not losing anybody into that, oh, well, that's just woohoo, or what does that mean? And human connection in this regard is the ability to entrust in somebody and rely on them for the care that they're providing, but also where the relationship of power is balanced and it's understood. So that's the kind of human connection that, though procedure and order and institutional-based care is meant to be predictable and measurable and consistent, the way in which that is executed is not, right? And so it questions the effectiveness of this idea that, if we have a system in place, then we'll get the results we want to see, whether it's behavioral change or service provision. And so I just wanted to point that irony that is lost on, it's lost on a lot of, and I don't mean, not everyone just thinks that way, but so what you're doing is not only a service to those you work with, but you're also inviting into the field the potentiality to reconsider what the assumptions and the foundations that we work off of, right? Another thing I wanted to talk to you about, you had said that you weren't entirely sure the reason why there is pushback. And the first thing that popped in my head when I was reading about this is the word liability. Again, that's central to this procedural-based approach to care. And everyone, liability and such is, it's something they teach you in human services classes, like that and confidentiality. They push it. And it's understandable. Nobody, no one wants to have to deal with an unfair situation wherein they were doing their job. And then whoever they might have been providing services to decides to, screw them over, for lack of a better word, right? But the reality is that, and there are papers to back this up too, that rarely occurs because even the hierarchy and the power dynamic that exists when you're providing care kind of acts as a barrier to that. So what are your thoughts on the idea that liability is the issue for effectively expanding, the interest and the advocacy for in-home or host-home provision?
In respect to liability, I would say I wouldn't really go towards liability, but I see where you're coming from. But because a lot of agencies, for instance, I'm contracted to an agency that places these individuals in my home, and I see when they train me, I'm extensively trained. I'm trained in different. I see they take time to run my background, and I'm extensively trained. And if they don't trust me, I don't think they would place individuals in my home. So I understand the fear of these agencies to shift away from liability, but I don't think liability would be one of my reasons.
How do you become a home host provider? Like, obviously, you just mentioned there's a degree of things that they do to make sure that you are trustworthy, right? And you have
Yep.
the skill set. So
Mhm.
how did you come into this role?
So how I came into the role is experience is necessary. Uh, I think one of the the best or the most experience you can get to become a hosting provider is what you call a delivery service professional. So DSPs, delivery service professional or direct support professional, or I would say direct support professional, are individuals, social service organizations hire to work with individuals with developmental disabilities. So remember I mentioned group homes? So DSPs are the individuals that come and work during the morning, the day, and the evening shift with individuals with developmental disabilities. So if you can work in a group home with those individuals, you are one step away from being a host and provider because you know the behaviors of these individuals, you know how to deal with them, you know how to interact with them, you know how to exercise patience, you know how to distress, you know how not to go off, how not to be mad and angry from their behaviors. So I think being a direct support professional is one of the easiest way to becoming a host and provider. For me personally, I didn't become a direct support professional before I got into hosting. I already had experience in human services, like working with trafficked women, working with refugees. I already had some of the qualities needed to working with individuals with developmental disabilities. And one of the key experience is patience. You cannot lose it. You have to be extremely patient.
Good call. I love that. Yeah. And it goes unsaid maybe, but experience is that is the skill that you have to have in this field. I've seen many people, and there will be more to come in the future, who might expect that reading from a book or learning about a theory or applied practice, you can learn a lot. But in this field, that's half the battle.
Be sure to tune in April 4th for part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Tim. Plus, we are thrilled to be back together in person at our national conference happening this November in Virginia. So don't forget to save the date and visit our website for more details as they come. See you there.